Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast series, I delve into the hidden characteristics of OCD, anxiety, and anxiety disorders. The things that most people don't see, that are behind closed doors and shut within the mind about anxiety. My goal with these podcasts is to bring about awareness of obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. Understand that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these podcasts are things that I have used, discovered, or have been recommended to me, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. This podcast was recorded March 24th, 2017. This is podcast number 5, called Raising the Child Within. The last podcast we've been talking about OCD and all the different aspects of it over the last couple of podcasts. And this one delves off of that just a little bit, even though it plays a part in it. We're talking now about, well, as I look at it, we raise ourselves into adulthood. Our parents raise us and we grow. And most of us, we grow on the outside. Our brain does grow in knowledge and experience and all of that. But I feel like the inner child that we gained during the sponge years, and I'll talk briefly about it now, but my next podcast is about the sponge years because I run into that so much with the clients I work with, because besides families, I do work with individuals, and the individuals can be in there. I've had clients as old as 72 and still find them working off of rules developed in the sponge years, the early years of life. So what I find is, we have a childhood where we go to school, and we play a lot as children, which is great. At least most kids do. We move on to going into high school, then we get into college, where we're learning I look at school as learning the outside stuff, the environment. Then we move on to, we get out of college, we get into a job where we start learning experience of skills and things like that, where we, again, are working on learning and developing outside forces, outside of our internal selves, skills, talents, education. Then we end up getting married. And there's a whole nother learning process there of learning how to be an adult in that way, in a way. But again, really still working on outside forces, putting our experiences and education out to the outside sources of our children, of the world, of our jobs, all of that. We have kids. We may travel. We may really live what could be considered a good life, a rich life, and I actually have an example of that in a way, where I had a gentleman, he was in his 60s, that came in. His life was, he lived a life of rich dollar-wise. He was a millionaire at most of his life, so he always had plenty of money, had all the things he wanted, but never really worked on his emotions, never worked on the messages that were buried deep down inside of him. And finally it came out And it came out in a physical format as well as an emotional format. So we can live a life and think that it's full, think that it's rich in experiences and in things that could develop us. But a lot of times we don't really enrich the child that is within us, the child that physically grew up but didn't emotionally and mentally grow up the same way. And what happens a lot of times is we raise ourselves, and the story of our lives and the rules of our lives come from another place, another person, our authorities, our parents, our teachers. And so we have all this talk that goes on inside that's really the inner child. And people laugh about that. People make jokes about it, about the inner child coming out. So I don't think it's necessarily a laughing matter. It's fun to make jokes about your inner child, but there's a real truth to it. In fact, I really want to develop a workshop about raising the inner child. Rules are set up from that point in our life, those sponge years, the young years, that we are still living into our 20s or 30s or 40s. And like I said, I even see it if it's not handled during the mid-years of our lives, we can still see it affecting our lives into our senior time. It's rules that were probably set up to protect us as a child, maybe from an abusive parent, maybe from just a verbally abusive parent, or maybe from a dramatic situation in our lives, a death. A lot of times for a young child to see someone die is dramatic compared to what an adult would see. An adult will be sad and grieve over it, but a child will grieve and be sad over it too, but also take it as a sign that they could die or their parents could die, and sends a whole different message into them as it would an adult. So we take on the authorities' rules that, like I said, in some twisted way, were probably to protect us. Because the mind's ability, the mind's job is to keep us safe, is to keep our mind safe. And we get these rules that are particular to a situation that might be happening during those sponge years. Zero sponge to me, well, most people look at sponge years or when we're really taking an environment as 0 to 3. I look at it going from 0 to about 20, to be honest with you. The sponge dries up when you get into those older years. And I'll go more into the sponge years later. But we take things in then that somehow were meant to protect us. And again, it might be a matter of, we take in the rule that we just need to shut up, because if we talk or if we say something, we're going to get smacked or we're going to get abused in some way. So we learn to turn our voice off at a very young age, which was protecting us then from getting slapped or getting hurt or whatever. But now in our adult years, it doesn't make any sense not to have your voice. You're old enough, nobody's going to slap you, or hopefully not. Or if they do, you need to realize it and get away from them. So it's not helping us. I tend to call it the coat of rules that you put on as a child. We put on this coat that's the size of the child, but we wear it the rest of our lives, and it gets tighter and tighter and tighter until we become the Hulk and tear it apart, because it's just way oversized. So it's really a time when I work with somebody, it's time to kind of get rid of those rules. And I don't look at it as tearing down the whole foundation, ripping those rules out and throwing them all away, because it's really tough to do. And you don't really want to do that, because not every rule that's in there is harmful to you. What I look at doing is taking out, like a real foundation, like a brick foundation. You take out each brick and analyze it and look at it and say, is this serving me or is it not serving me? And really investigate that. And when you find one that doesn't work with you, you throw it out and you find a new rule to fill that space up. A rule that fits you at the age and the appropriateness of where you are right then and there. If one serves you, keep it. But you have to make sure it truly, truly serves you. So we have to be very careful to see what we picked up in those young years. See who we got it from, and does it fit or serve me now? So it's really time to get rid of that code of rules we put on when we were a child and move on. And that's why I do help people in doing that. I help people to first find out those rules, accept that those are the rules, and then begin the process of changing it. Begin the process of talking to that inner child. Possibly forgiving that inner child. Now that's a little tougher place to be. But it's surprising what I've seen is that people tend to still be angry at the inner child, be blaming the inner child, in a matter of almost like saying, you should have known better then, you should have done something then, when really in reality the child was doing what it knew how to do best to protect itself. The mind was doing what it needed to do and knew to do to protect that child. So there's a lot of work around that, but I think it's important to really look at that. So it's time. Take off the coat and put a fresh one on. Or maybe just not even put one on at all. This concludes this podcast. Please remember to leave comments for me because that really helps me to understand what you're looking for and helps give me fodder for the next possible podcast. Also, I'd love to hear your invisible wheelchair story if you're willing to share it. If you are, feel free to go to invisiblewheelchair.com and click on Tell Your Story. Now, if you've heard these things and you feel like you need further assistance or some help in what you're going through, and you want to spend some time with me working through those issues, then feel free to book a session at focusedhealthyfamily.com or familyocd.com, or simply call me at 704-562-1630. Finally, don't forget there is a tap-in recording following this podcast you may want to take advantage of. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and will join me for the next one. Remember, keep tapping, talking, and transcending your life into new heights. Thank you, and have a great day.